In the 2022 midterm elections, there were many candidates who were running. 435 seats were how many were up for grabs across the United States in the House of Representatives. But perhaps you didn't expect someone like Maxwell Frost to get elected, a Gen Z member of Congress. He is the first ever member of Gen Z to be elected to the United States Congress, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Let's start out with where, I mean, I know I often get this question as well myself as a younger journalist, perhaps younger than, your average journalist, and you are younger than, you could say, the average member of Congress. Where did you get the idea to, first of all, get involved in politics, and then second of all, take that to ultimately run for Congress?
Yeah, well, again, thank you so much for having me on, Wyatt. I got involved in politics 10 years ago. What changed everything for me was the Sandy Hook shooting. I went to a arts middle school and high school. Before every concert, I was a jazz band drummer. Before every jazz band concert, my best friends and I would go to this restaurant across the street and just load up on a ton of junk food. And I remember that night specifically because we're there eating, and there was a silence that fell across the entire restaurant. We looked around, looked at each other, and finally looked at the television screen to see that somebody walked into an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, and murdered 20 children and six teachers. This had a huge impact on me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was scared at the concert about getting shot. And really, that's what changed everything for me. I ended up going to Washington, D.C. for the memorial that was going on. And it was there that I met a guy named Matthew Soto. His sister, Vicky, was a teacher at Sandy Hook who was killed. And just seeing his demeanor, seeing a 16-year-old with the demeanor of a 60-year-old talking about his sister who was murdered changed my life forever. And that's what got me involved in politics.
Wow. And then when you look at what you've been able to do so far in Congress, obviously the election for Speaker of the House took quite a while, longer than most people would have expected per se. But now that the House of Representatives is kind of in full swing, now that the kind of elementary portion of things with the election for Speaker of the House is out of the way, what impact are you hoping to have, and what are some of those issues that your constituents of Florida's 10th district are wanting you to bring to Washington?
Yeah, well, there's so many issues that we campaigned on that are important to people in Central Florida. I'll say the top three that we're thinking about out the gate are number one, housing. Housing affordability, ensuring that we are upping the power of renters and tenants in the marketplace. COVID did a lot in showing the inequities in healthcare. It also furthered the inequities in housing, and especially when we talk about tenants, younger tenants, poor and working class folks. So right now in Central Florida, we have one of the worst affordable housing problems in the country per capita. So this is something that's top of mind for all my constituents and just all the people in Central Florida, and something we're thinking about. The next one is gun violence. As I said, gun violence is what got me involved in this work in the first place. I'm a survivor of gun violence myself, and really thinking through, I think there's a lot we can do in a bipartisan way in this next Congress to get more money for what's called community violence intervention. These are programs at the local level that help end gun violence before it even happens. It's proactive community-based solutions that I think are really important. And then the last thing is music and arts funding. Music and the arts are a huge part of my life. My dad's a full-time musician. I went to arts high school and middle school, and Central Florida and Orlando has a very vibrant art scene. And so I want to do everything I can to introduce as much equity as we can into the arts. And I think we can also do that in a bipartisan way this Congress.
Let me ask you too, obviously in the House of Representatives, there is a Republican majority. It's a very slim majority, though the Democrats still have control of the Senate and obviously the presidency with President Biden. But not having full control of the House may still add obviously an extra step of challenge to try and get past various things like what you just alluded to. So what do you make of that, and how will you plan to get things done despite that Republican majority?
Well, we have to be honest with ourselves and talk to people about what's the current landscape. And what we saw over this past week is that even when Republicans, have an agenda themselves, it looks like they're going to have a hard time passing it because they're having a hard time getting their party together. And so what we're going to see is a lot of defense over these next 2 years from Democrats. The past 2 years from the CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure package, the bipartisan gun safety package, there were so many good bills pass that are going to have provide transformational change for families and for people. We're not going to see that over the next 2 years because this Republican majority is more interested in Hunter Biden's laptop, investigations, investigating. I mean, the amount of bills that we're voting on this week that are it's just ridiculous. It's out, it's crazy. And so either way, these Republicans in this majority are more interested in virtue signaling and rallying up their base. And they're not interested in governing. They're not interested in like bold transformational change for working class people and for people across this country and for young people. And so with that in mind, I still think we do have an opportunity to get some good things done in a bipartisan way. It's just not going to look like what it's been the past 2 years because we don't have the majority. And I like to be honest with people about that because this is on all of us to come together and elect a working class majority in the next Congress. But there's still work we can do now. And guess what? We have a big fight on our hands. And so people can rest assured that there's great members of Congress here that are going to fight that fight against a lot of these insurrectionist Republicans up here that are fighting to undermine democracy. But we need everyone involved in that as well back at home.
And just lastly, before we conclude, when you look at, you mentioned in the next Congress trying to elect a strong Democratic majority, what do you think the Democrats need to do to be able to attract young people to the party, attract, people of color to the party, attract people that are ultimately people the Democratic Party needs to attract in order to win an election?
Two things: our message and what we stand for and the way we get it out. And, on the message part, what I find is young people, especially marginalized communities, they don't want something to vote against. They want something to vote for. And what we see time and time again is, I know during 2020, we had a campaign that was really a referendum on fascism and Donald Trump and a lot of that far-right MAGA movement. But we have to move beyond that in our messaging now, because what I find across the country is campaigns that spend more time talking about what they're not or their opponent are the ones that tend to lose the most from what we saw in this past midterm. But the campaigns that focused on their agenda, what Democrats are going to work for working families and providing that North Star, those are the folks that ended up winning. Not in every case, of course, but when we look at the trends, and I think we need to take that note and run with it. People want to, they're tired of hearing about Donald Trump. They're tired about hearing these folks. They want to hear about what you're going to do, what Democrats are going to do, what the candidate's going to do to fight for people every day. And I think it's important to get that message across. The second part is meeting people where they're at and getting that message to people, right? And so whether it's text, social media, TV, mail, door knocking, concerts, events, right? Being very creative in the way that we get down into the community, I think it really helps to build the movement that you need to win. It's how we won both my primary and my general. We were very creative. We also used the normal means of communication too. But I think it's really important to think about how are we meeting voters where they're at and how are we working on expanding the electorate and opening up the process.
Okay, Congressman Maxwell Frost of Florida, representing Florida's 10th district. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.